good evening. To reform or not to, the government has stoked a major public debate with its intention to reform Uganda's longest land tenure system. Incorporated in 1900 by an agreement between the British colonial government and Buganda, 10% of Uganda's land was apportioned to the Mailo land tenure system, which favored mostly Buganda chiefs and prominent Ugandans at the time. Over the years, the land ownership system has enabled dual ownerships, giving landlords ownership but allowing settlers a form of tenancy. Now, the government says that should change. The first indication of a reform came with appointment of a major proponent for the Mailo reform, Sam Mayanja, and subsequently a Heroes' Day message in which Museveni condemned the land tenure system as evil. Buganda Kingdom's Katikiro, Charles Peter Maiga, has insisted that the tenure system is synonymous with the heritage of the kingdom, and any attempts to do away with it will amount to nothing but expropriation of both land and the culture of the kingdom. Tonight, on the spot, we have the Buganda Minister for Special Duties, David F.K. Mpanga, to discuss the salient issues of what is emerging as Uganda's biggest political debate. David, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I understand it's your first time for On the Spot TV, so we are very glad to have you on this panel tonight.
Thank you very much, Raymond, and good evening, viewers.
Yeah, I want to start by asking a critical question. Does Buganda Kingdom consider this Mailo land reform debate a hot political issue? Is it something that the kingdom has considered and say this is a political issue that we'll engage in?
Thank you very much, Raymond, first of all, and good evening. The Kingdom of Buganda has been made aware of the fact that subsequent to the appointment of a new cabinet, there have been discussions around the issue of land tenure. There hasn't been a formal policy that we understand to be government policy. We have heard matters said about land tenure. The Buganda Kingdom, it's no mystery, is a large landowner, institutional landowner in this part of the country. And it's a large stakeholder. We have a lot to say, a lot to gain and a lot to lose from matters relating to land and land tenure. And the view of the kingdom is very simple, that matters relating to land tenure must be approached with level heads. They must be approached even-handedly, and they must be approached in a rational and calm way, informed, rational, calm. So there should be no name calling. There should be little blame gaming and baiting. And there should be a consensual search for solutions. We all live here. We have no more land being produced. Land is not like animal husbandry, that we hope that between now and next year, Luzira Hill and Buya Hill would have gone together and have and produced another hill. So God gave us a finite resource in terms of land, but yet the population is growing. So we need to look at these things rationally, level-headed, and use informed debate to come to right decisions.
You say rational and informed, yes. And my producer, if they could run the first time Museveni spoke about this land reform, yes, was at the Heroes' Day. If we have that bite, let's run it, and you hear the manner in which the president describes the Mailo yes. land tenure system. Yes. Let's first hear that bite and then get back into the conversation.
The system which is in Uganda here, this one of Mailo, all that, and some people support it, but it's very bad for the people. This is an evil system. It's not a fair system, and it is not in other parts of Uganda. Because in other parts of Uganda, when you are in a Kibanja, it is your Kibanja. But here, you find these people support this, that. It's really very bad, not fair. But let's see what... I appointed a commission of inquiry by Bamugemirere. They have written a report. All of you people support it, and we see how we move forward. Tukizuganye, bano absentee landlords, they are the ones we can pay are paid, the ones we can't pay, we shall see what propose. But the. 'Bebanja banywerere ku bibanja byabwe. This is what I would like to appeal everybody to support.
David, that's the head of state, the second biggest landholder in the country, describing the system of land tenures, very bad, evil. What's the perception that you make of these statements?
I wouldn't want to get into a debate around what the president said and how he might have, what language he might have used to characterize the debate. I'd rather reframe it in this way. He says, let's see. I think it's an important thing if you're talking about mediation and dispute resolution, that you pick the positive. He doesn't say, it's evil, therefore I'm sending it to hell. He ends his statement by saying, let's see. And it's in the let's see that I want to insert the following things, that there isn't a Mailo system in Amuru. We've seen land disputes in Amuru. There isn't a Mailo system or Mailo tenure in the Mount Elgon area. The Beneta dispossessed of their land wrangles there. The Basongora in western Uganda, in Bulisa, so many places around Uganda, documented. And His Excellency also spoke about the Bamugemerere Commission. The Bamugemerere Commission visited many parts of Uganda at your cost and mine. Let's see whether they recorded the cause of land disputes and land wrangles today to be entirely a function of a particular tenure system, or whether in fact we are being asked to look at a tenure system, whereas in fact there are other dysfunctional issues, and I'll come to that in a minute. But let's just imagine this for a minute, Raymond. Have you seen anywhere in Buganda, because this is where the Mailo tenure system exists, or heard a story that's been reported here by the by the NTV, that somebody turned up with a land title, held it up in front of occupants, and the occupants packed their bags and left? No. It's never been the case that somebody just says, I'm the Mailo owner and I decree, therefore, that you must leave my land. It's you know, I'm reducing it to its most absurd, because you need to imagine and understand it like that. The problem, Raymond, is people come in the middle of the night. If we go to a church recently and break down a church, a place of worship, break it down. Everybody was aghast. The Katikiro went there, His Excellency the President visited. Everybody was aghast. A Church of Uganda, church with a cross above it, place of worship, broken and destroyed. You find wrangles around property that is very clearly a place of worship. We're talking about Loom Street. That's not Mailo land. That's freehold land in the middle of town. But there are wrangles about that. You go to Amuru, you find you know, the late General Ronda as a Minister of Internal Affairs, Minister for Lands, and other people turning up, and their communities up in arms about issues of whose land is it, stripping naked and exposing themselves to the, you know, to the ministers. What is there Mailo there? No, it isn't. It's force, the misuse of force. It's the absence of proper dispute resolution. If the two of us contend over Mailo land, or freehold land, or leasehold land, we need an impartial, fast, and conclusive mechanism to determine which one of the two of us, just imagine we were brothers, and we're fighting over an inheritance. We need somebody to tell us, you are the younger brother, but you're the rightful heir, as per the will. Or you're the older brother, but you're the person who spent the money, your father was a trustee. For you, you need somebody to determine these things using objective tools and in a trusted way. That's failed. So we don't have proper courts. The district land tribunals which were set up to help move dispute resolution closer to the ground were never funded. They collapsed. We have police and army, the people who have guns, who turn up uninvited by the tenants or brought in by corrupt landlords or whatever. Now, all of that is kind of wrapped up and put on every owner under Mailo system's neck. So a Mailo owner, the Kingdom of Buganda, let me use that, or the Church of Uganda, or the Roman Catholic Church, the Archdiocese, or you know, Kampala Archdiocese, is suddenly presumed to be a land grabber, an absentee landlord. It is the preventing people from developing. But in fact, the contrary is true. We know from the report of the Bamugambere, at least from the inquiry stage, that there are certain names that keep coming up. There are certain people who are not 1900 allocatees of land who keep coming up. They've been using or misusing state power. They're misusing court proceedings, misusing state security. Many times acquiring their wealth, which they then put into the land, corruptly. Those people are causing insecurity to many people. If the Kabaka of Buganda, just by way of example, a big Mailo land owner in this part of the country, was evicting people, Raymond, there'd be huge displacement of populations, large displacement. But to the contrary, the Kingdom of Buganda has been saying, let's sit down, talk about this, everybody find a win-win solution. So one example is a Chapa Mongaro. Let's get into a leasehold, lessor and lessee arrangement. It's the arrangement that I live on with the Kampala District Land Board. My primary residence, my home, my family home, I own a lease. I bought that lease off somebody, and I live there with my family. I expect if I should live long enough that I'll have the right to renew. But if I don't and I have to leave it to my children because I've passed on, I expect that my children will have an opportunity to renew that lease. The Kingdom of Buganda does the same.
Before we get into this debate,
Yes.
I want us to discuss the issues that government has raised around the Mailo land tenure system.
Yes.
One of those is that it encourages perpetual serfdom, that the people who are Bibanja holders
Yes.
on Mailo land tenure
Yes.
system are unable to own that land hundreds of years later, even if it went down to generations.
Yes.
How do you guarantee that under the Mailo land tenure system?
The one example that I gave, I'm a leaseholder. I don't consider myself a serf. Leaseholding is a recognized land tenure system in our constitution. Under the Land Act and under the Land Registration of Titles Act, it's registrable. We could encourage and should encourage people to move away from the informal system of pure settlement, which is unrecorded, which is insecure, and get into win-win arrangements that enable people to have registered tenure and renewable tenure. There's protection in leasehold. There is also the possibility, the capacity to give people the ability to buy. So, for example, it's presently the law that if a Mailo owner is selling their title, they should give the occupying tenants the first opportunity to buy that land. How many people, and vice versa, if the people who have Chivanja tenancy wish to sell, they should give the first opportunity to the land title owner. How have we facilitated that? We need to revisit some of these things. How have we facilitated that? If it becomes a name-calling and blame-gaming situation, it becomes difficult. People look at these titles and think, I put my money in this, because again, we're not talking about people who were allocated land and hold it for free. Most Mailo owners bought that land. They bought it. Others have now used it as security. So you also have to think about, say, banks. If I took a Mailo title, put it in a bank, and set up a small-scale industry, employing 20 people, if suddenly Mailo is evil, cancel it. But that title is holding down the factory, which is holding down jobs, helping the economy run along. How is the innocent bank, which was told this is a legitimate, constitutionally guaranteed, recognized asset class, the holder of that asset is guaranteed against, is protected against compulsory acquisition in the same constitution. How is the bank which lent money against that suddenly going to square its position? We're going to trigger unnecessarily an economic situation, a negative economic situation. We're going to trigger a lack of confidence in our economy because, first they came for the Jews. When they come for that asset class, how do you think a person who's coming in from against essentially natives, how do you think the guy who's coming with his briefcase from Dubai or London or US or wherever investors come from to invest in Uganda is going to feel or think in assessing security of assets.
David.
If Mailo is bad, are large bank accounts going to be bad next week because somebody down the road doesn't have money? So we need to attach those bank accounts. Every country that's tried to attach historical injustice to radical reform has tended to end up with an economic crisis. One of the biggest countries being Uganda. Idi Amin did it with the Asians. We saw what happened. Idi Amin abolished Mailo. We saw what happened. The economy didn't go upward. Security of tenure did not go upward. The contrary happened. The economy went down. The people that were intended to be assisted did not benefit. The same happened in Zimbabwe. So, you know, evil, colonial, let's first sit down calmly, talk about these things calmly, look at the primary problems and find constructive solutions to those problems. As I said, one very useful, obvious and on the table solution is leasehold. It's in the Constitution. I'm a leaseholder, I'm not a serf. I don't work for the Kampala District Land Board. I live happily with my family and I pay my ground rent, small amount of money every so often, and I can will that property to my children or to my spouse. I can sell it if I want, and subject again to spousal protection, for example, again that's in the law. And we can try and get things done in that way.
Yeah, but David,
sure.
You said that majority of the Mailo land owners are people that have bought the land.
Correct.
The opinion of government that we've had from Sam Mayanja, who is now the Minister of State for Lands,
Yes.
writing the new vision today, is that majority of land owners under the Mailo land tenure system are people who got it from the 1900 agreement.
See,
and his argument is these are Buganda chiefs who collaborated with the British colonial government and instead got land.
Sitting very neatly in a colonially created office. You see, let's not take history and read it through small paradigms. Let's widen the scope, the vision. The 1900 agreement established what we call Uganda. They called it, the owners of it called it the Uganda Agreement. Let's also get history correct. Our king, Mpanga, was exiled at that time. You could say that the Buganda Agreement, 1900, was signed with people who were usurpers. They had overthrown our king, the Kabaka of Buganda. The biggest loser in that whole arrangement was the institution of the Kingdom of Buganda. It lost land. It owned all the land on behalf of the people of Buganda. Now, their grievances, if you want to say, you know, there was a whole grievance, loss of sovereignty, loss of economic rights, etc. But this is the point that I was making, Raymond, that if you selectively start saying and ideologically come to these things and say, I'm going to resolve a matter in 2021, basing on what I think about what happened in 1900. Raymond, you're running a country. You're not running your home, but even your home. If I had a dispute at home with my parents or whatever, I can't determine something that happened in 1985 and decide to visit it when my mom was 40-something and visit it on my mother now when she's 88. In certain aspects, she was better able to deal with things. She can't now. There's so many things. So, one, the land ownership class is much, much broader than the chiefs in Mr. Mayanja's mind. I'm a Mailo owner. So are many other people. How did I become a Mailo owner? I bought that land. I worked for it. I went to school, I studied, I made some money, and I bought land. Why did I buy that land? The very state that is paying Mr. Mayanja, Honorable, gave us assurance, both in terms of the Constitution and in terms of the laws that apply, that this is a recognized and safe and constitutionally guaranteed asset class. So if they wake up in the morning and they say Mailo is evil and therefore should be abolished, what's stopping them from saying tomorrow private bank accounts are evil and should be abolished? Where did you get money from? You see, because money, at some stage, if you take Marxism, I think it says all wealth is founded on crime, or something along those lines. So, so let everybody first dispossess themselves of all their assets. Let's perhaps all check ourselves into Luzira prison. And as we prove that we've not made this wealth illegally, we are all let out one by one, as you show, all your assets. I mean, I'm taking it a little facetiously, but there's a serious point to be made here. If you want to turn over an economy, if you want to turn over a polity overnight, if you want to cause social discord overnight, go about recklessly dealing with things like this on an ideological basis. If, which we think is the more likely scenario, you want to have a stable polity, you want to have a growing economy, you want to resolve matters in a way that enables everybody to thrive, you get a level head, you get a neutral arbiter. For example, it really ought not be the case that a person who leads land reform should have made so many haranguing statements prior to taking office. You need people who will be believed and who will have faith. Everybody will have faith in. Because even in win-win, there's a little bit of edging lose-lose. In any negotiation or in any arrangement, people will win something but will lose something. People must have the belief that that loss is legitimate and that that win, even the other person's win, is legitimate. If somebody has come from afar, calling me names, railing against me, assigning to me their own views of how bad I am, what's the likelihood that I'll think that their determination is neutral? And this is a matter of public law. It's not even a matter of just morality. It's a matter of public law. Ministers must act lawfully. In administrative law, they must act lawfully, they must act rationally, but they must also act without bias. If a minister has expressed themselves in such a biased way, whatever decision that they're going to make about my rights is bound to be tainted by that bias. And it may not matter that actually in one aspect they were objective. It's very important that Honorable Minister Mayanja, if he might not be able to disown his views of the past, should now behave like a minister and be dispassionate, encourage level-headed, calm discussion of matters which pertain, as I said, in Amuru, in Busongora, in Osukuru Rubongi Hills. It's all over the country. We need level-headed. We can't have a person who's come to target Raymond and think that whatever resolution there'll be will be fair to Raymond. It can't be.
David, 3 years ago, the Justice Catherine Bamugeme Commission released its first initial findings.
Yes.
And it had come out of listening to almost everyone across the country, including the Buganda Kingdom.
Correct.
You yourself actually represented the Buganda Kingdom when it appeared before that commission.
Correct. And the Katikiro himself went
yes,
as well, made submissions.
And it recommended a fusion of different land tenure systems. And one of the tenure systems it said we should do away with was Mailo land tenure system, even though they later disowned it. In the 3 land tenure systems that they say we should fuse, they relied very much on freehold and customary land tenure system. Yeah. Do you believe that that commission was a neutral commission and therefore it led to an outcome that could be publicly believed and applied?
The outcome of let me deal with the outcome. The report did not recommend the abolition of Mailo land. The report did not, to my knowledge, demonize, and it's not public, but I didn't see any reports around it saying it demonized particular landowners or particular land tenure. The report made findings based on research that they'd made, and to that commission, which treated the kingdom very fairly, invited the kingdom to make submissions. The Katikiro appeared before the commission and made submissions and made recommendations of reforms. We're not, and it's a very important thing to underline, the kingdom does not sit in some cloud or ivory tower and say that there isn't a problem. There is a problem, Raymond, a big problem of land. They're not making, as I said, new land, but they're making babies every day. All right? The population is growing. The population is not growing proportionately across all the land in Uganda. The population is growing at different rates in terms of density in different geographical areas. Development, by virtue of history, by virtue of other factors, is largely here. And that means that in the Kingdom of Buganda, unlike, but not exclusively to the Kingdom of Buganda, there is high pressure on land. It is splitting families. Let's talk about land wrangles in the fullness of them. Let's not just look at landlords and tenants. They're brothers and sisters who are fighting metaphorically in court, battling before various officials, before the land protection units of police, before RDCs, before LC3, LC5 chairpersons, before Ministry of Lands, in all sorts of fora which overlap. There are people disputing over land inheritance, over people selling their land. Every family has this problem, right? Nearly every family has this problem. 2, there is a problem that relates to land boundaries where they're not properly surveyed or where they are disputed around the surveying. Again, people beat each other up over these things. They're trying to move, is this my land? No, it's not. Is it your land? There are people who've got 2 certificates of title over the same piece of land. Yeah. There are many problems, dysfunctions, Raymond, in administration of land, dysfunctions, as I said, in dispute resolution, dysfunctions in the security system that enable some people to have access to muscle. Some people bring stick-bearing, rod-bearing kanyamas, that too. So there's no police to protect them against these extra-legal actors. There are overlaps. You will have a judgment if you get it, but then you have to take that judgment to the police to reassess. The RDC is also going to reassess and rehear. The LC5 chairman may reassess and hear, but then if one of the parties can get to a minister who can bring in a few army people, those army people will come, that minister will reassess and rehear. There are disputes which the commission looked at and came up with a whole raft of recommendations. The kingdom doesn't live in cloud cuckoo land, but what we're saying is do not demonize a system, a land tenure system, without thinking through the primary, secondary, tertiary consequences thereof. Do not demonize people, because the kingdom is people. Institutional landowners are ultimately people. If you talk about the Catholic Church, the Church of Uganda, the Muslim Supreme Council, these are landowners. There are individuals there. Have you heard of the bishops in the Archdiocese of Kampala chasing anybody? No, they're not. But they have Bibanja holders on their land. The same for the Church of Uganda. So we also need to look at this question of the bona fide and the mala fide, good faith and bad faith occupant. That if we're talking about the dispossessed people, did the dispossessed people include the people from 1900? Do they include the people who moved onto the land in 1983? Do you see what I mean? Or should we, I come from a family that lived on a Chivanja, still lives on a Chivanja. Our burial grounds were on a Chivanja. Now, we were a dispossessed class. My great-grandfather was fighting with Mpanga and did not participate in the 1900 agreement. So is my neighbor who moved onto the land in 1983 as dispossessed as me, that was there since before 1900? Who are you going to give it to, having taken it from? So you're taking it from a person who was not in the 1900 arrangement, bought a title 5, 10, 15 times away from the original allocatee. You're giving it to a person who was not there to be deprived in the first place. His or her ancestors were in another locality within Buganda, or were from outside Buganda. So let's look also very closely at unity and social cohesion. Buganda is the only part of Uganda, I can say that with my hand on my heart and without fear of contradiction, where all ethnic groups in Buganda live. Cheek by jowl and happily, can own land, can own Bibanja, informal settlement, formal settlement by way of ownership. It's generally not the case in many other parts of the country. We need to be encouraging the rest of the country to become like Buganda. Let's talk to the principal landowners and find out how they've managed to foster that arrangement. All right? And not be misguided about the behavior of some new landowning class and blame it on the old and say everything must be thrown out, baby and bathwater. Take the baby gently out, drain out the bathwater, again even throwing bathwater out the window. You might say this is all waste, but there's a person standing outside. So pour it nicely into the drain so that it's not you know,
it doesn't
sprinkle on unwitting, as I said, banks, people who are working innocently with land as security, who are using land in various ways, people who are building, who are the real estate asset class, people who have set up businesses to build and sell. Overnight, you're telling them that the thing that they're selling is useless, it's nothing. What's that?
Yeah.
And you're giving it to who?
Yes. David, I want us to first take a very short break, but when we get back, we continue the conversation, and now on development on Mailo land. Thank you so much for staying with us on the spot. We are having David Mpanga discussing the Mailo land tenure system. David, I want us to take now a broader look in terms of the economy on the Mailo land tenure system. And from someone who we would both agree is at least impartial. The World Bank says in 2018 that the overlap of ownership and use rights on Mailo land has been a key impediment to investment and improved productivity in Uganda's agricultural economy. And what this basically means is that a lot of Mailo land is productive agricultural land. It's very close to the city, makes it economically active. And yet the World Bank itself says that majority of the owners of Mailo land are not willing to develop it. They're not developing on the Mailo land tenure system.
Very interesting, sir.
Or at a commercial scale. They're developing, but not at a commercial scale.
Very interesting. Very quickly, just before we came on, I think the first advert that came on was an advert advertising Mirembe Villas. Mirembe Villas is a very successful joint venture between the Kingdom of Buganda and a Chinese investor. It's not the only joint venture between Uganda and the Buganda Kingdom, so Ugandan native entity, and foreign investors. I'm not going to sit here and say I know much more than the World Bank, but I think the World Bank should also be humble enough to learn some things from natives. We're not averse to growth, we're not averse to investment, we're not averse to economic production. To the contrary, the Buganda Kingdom runs on 5 tenets. And tenet number 3, I'm not going to break them all down here, but tenet number 3, Nsonga Sema Songa Yoksatu, is hard work and productivity. We want people to be hardworking and productive. Everybody grows. It's a tide that lifts all boats if people are rallied to development and production. Now, as I said earlier, demonization of a particular tenure, particular people, does not help economic development, does not help finding solutions. These people came all the way from China, found a way of talking to people that they found here, and they're building houses, and these houses are being bought and occupied, not exclusively but by anybody who can afford them, and they're helping resolve a housing shortage. The same can be done for all manner of industry. The same can be done in partnership with not just the Kingdom of Buganda, but landowners wherever they may be, howsoever they hold. I'm not sure, but it sounds to me like the World Bank would like a system. If this is what they would like, then this I'm absolutely opposed to. A system where they turn up, they being the outsiders, the World Bank, and without consulting with natives, without engaging natives, take land as and where they want it. If they have to negotiate with something, if willing buyer, willing seller is so alien to the World Bank that they don't want it, I'm afraid that's what happens in all these other countries. Why is it so bad here? Why is it that we have investors whose primary demand is for free land? There's no free land in Kenya. There's more industrialization and development in Kenya. There's no free land in South Africa. There's more industrialization and more direct investment in those jurisdictions I talked about, and many others. So sometimes the Baganda talk about chiso chambuzi, like when you slaughter a goat, they cut off the goat's head and put it down, and there's a guy who's got to skin it. The guy who skins it is not usually the guy who cut off the head, but they position the head in such a way that it's looking at the guy, blamefully looking at, unblinkingly looking at the guy who's skinning as if he's the guy who killed. And the guy saying, look, goat, I'm sorry, I'm skinning, but I didn't kill you. All right, so what we're trying to avoid is this chiso chambuzi rhetorical kind of thing. If the World Bank thinks that our land tenure system is a hindrance to development, we're not saying we're completely averse to any form of discussion and solutions around it. I think the World Bank, if it was here, would agree that we approach those things with a calm head, with the correct information, acting with impartial arbiters, and without demonization of one person or another. If they want to turn up and say, what we want is free land, let them show us the country that has developed, that's working very well, where investors just take land. They don't. They co-invest. What's wrong with co-investing and getting the natives to come up? Why do we have a development paradigm that must always entail, and I'm talking about this from the position of the peasant as well as from the position of a landowner, that entails moving natives? Because that's the other problem, that they're pursuing one asset class, but the day after that, they're going to pursue Bibanja holders in the same way. Let's look at where government owns land. How have they treated people that they call encroachers? Why are they peasants and Bibanja holders when they're on Mailo land, but encroachers and other evil names when they're on NFA land, when they're in the Elgon National Park, the Benin, that's their native land. They're Bibanja holders in Elgon. Why do they suddenly become encroachers there? The Basongora, they're also called encroachers. That's their land, that's where they came from. You see, why does the government speak with two tongues? Different languages. When the government talks about subsistence farming, the difficulties in subsistence farming, in documents, they talk about the evil of fragmentation of land. When we talk about the problems with fragmentation of Bibanja, suddenly it's like, oh, what, let's deal with these things rationally, without demonizing anybody. Let's find solutions, because economic production is a tide that lifts all boats. Everybody will be happy.
The question that I want, and you said the Buganda Kingdom is open to discussions around reform. What kind of reform would guarantee a security of tenure for people who are not Mailo land owners but would like to develop on Mailo land, say commercial agriculture, and still have a security of tenure that outlives them?
First of all, as I said, one of the easiest and most ready ways of dealing with this is leaseholds. Leaseholds envision a freeholder, forget about Mailo, a freeholder and a leaseholder, all right, who is given security of tenure, which is registrable, and which is title for a fixed period, but it's title to the complete exclusion of everybody if you're abiding by the terms of your lease. All foreign direct investment, if it's done by foreigners, will not qualify for freeholding in Uganda. So if we're talking about they're looking for leases, but can't talk to freeholders because the freehold happens to have some local attributes which make it Mailo, it makes me suspicious. Maybe that wasn't your problem in the first place. Maybe you wanted free land. And if you wanted free land, were you really going to compensate the occupants? Or was your intention to relocate them? Just say, get off, and nobody's recorded them anywhere. So there are solutions. Those solutions must include use of existing land tenure like leasehold. But there must also be solutions that turn on, again, constitutionally recognized and guaranteed protections. If there must be acquisition, there must be compensation. It must be in the public interest. And that public interest, we must be able to have arbitration around it as to whether one is in the public interest, and two, whether the compensation that you're giving me is fair and appropriate. Those are matters that are in the Constitution. We don't think that it's a bad thing.
Would you support a forceful compensation for Mailo landowners who have undeveloped land? Why
would it have to be forceful, Raymond?
Because
you see, we create this impression. It's very important that the viewers don't live with this impression that Mailo owners are some people who live on some hill, they're different from me maybe, and you, they have different hair. Or Mailo owners are everywhere. It's you, it's people like our viewers. Nobody wants to hold land purely for the holding of land. Nobody wants to keep land undeveloped. No one, literally no one. The deadlock that's been caused by politicization and over populist and heated discussion around Mailo and other land tenures has made land development difficult. Raymond, you can't survey your land without about 5, 6, 7 permissions, just a survey, to determine a boundary. Because people think if there's a survey going on, suddenly, there's a bad thing happening. Just a survey. Because of the heightened, disputes that have been, to a certain extent, engendered. We need to calm these temperatures down. We need to bring people into arrangements that enable them to understand that if there's development on the land, that development is going to be mutually beneficial. Not just when mutual suggests that two parties, can be tripartially, I don't know if there's such a word, but can be beneficial to a title holder, to an occupant, and to an investor. You see, how do we find, and there are many levers that can be used, but you will not get those solutions shouting at each other, calling each other's names, demonizing one person. You don't need to force people to sell land. Show them the value that you're giving them. Most people only own land because it's perceived to be a safe asset class. If you have a thriving stock exchange, if you have a lucrative bond market, if you have, people will sell land and buy bonds. But you can't have a thriving stock exchange. You can't have a thriving bond market or securities market if you attack asset classes based on ideological and perceived historical injustices. What will happen, therefore, is I'll keep my money there because I'm not going to keep it under my floor. If you're just saying we're acquiring it for the acquiring its sake, you have to contend with the Constitution. Is that in the public interest? Can you afford it? Even if you're saying we're going to pay bargain basement prices, can you afford it? Can you do it in a manner that does not discriminate? Do you see what I mean? If you're saying land that can't be used, I might have land that looks empty to you. And I'll tell you, that hill is sacred to us. We go there once a year or twice a year, but we like to keep it like that. Or we go there once in our lifetime. Nagalabi Hill, that's where we crown our kings. We don't just go there every day. But if it's on Mailo land, if you suddenly decide, oh, these people are misusing land, this is very proximate to the kingdom and we must do away with it, it's our culture. I'm entitled to say my use of this land is to keep it empty. That's also my right as a landowner. Why should I be deprived of that right because somebody else thinks that they can better use that land as a golf course around a hotel? Because again, if we talk about golf courses, I'm not a golfer, but as a person might say this whole golf course is a misuse of land. Some men come along here, knock about a ball, walk around. This could be houses, this could be a factory, this could be offices, this could be a hospital. But you just want to chase a ball around the whole day. But it's their land. It's the use that they wish to put it to. I agree with the right to associate, their right to own land, their right to enjoy themselves in the way that, and they're not killing anybody. Let them play golf. So I know land is a very precious resource, but I keep coming back to this theme. We need to take the temperature down. We need to bring correct information. We need to act rationally. We need to act lawfully and without bias.
The government says that a lot of the landless people need to find, one, land to develop themselves, two, ownership, house ownership and the kind, and one of the principal drivers in the argument, particularly that the ones that we've seen by both Sam Mayanja and Judith Nabakoba meeting the people, the stakeholders, was that Buganda is the seat of the central government, but also where 65% of Uganda's economy is locked. So Buganda must make concessions. Is that an argument you're willing to listen to, that after years of being the seat of government, you've benefited from development that is government-led, and that development has created a sort of surge of people from their rural neighborhoods to this urban center, and now there's a crisis of the landless and the people that have land and the landed. Is it an argument that Buganda is willing to listen to and make concessions on?
See, I don't have the benefit of having seen the document or the place where it's said that they've argued, they've made this point. But if it's true that they have, and you've characterized it properly, first consider this, that it's a contradiction to the whole argument around 1900. That's the point that I was making earlier. Is the concern around people who were dispossessed in 1900, or is the concern around people who've come subsequent to 1900 who have no land? If there is a concern around the people who've come to Buganda and need land in Buganda, let's also ask our question, where has their land gone? Where they came from. It's not a bad question to ask what happened to the land that they came from. Now, if there's certain people sitting in Kampala holding levers of power and have access to lots of cash, who are buying lots of land in rural areas where they come from, fencing it off, chasing people away, and forcing them into Buganda to create a landless crisis, I'm afraid, again, we need to talk about these things properly and say, why are these people being chased away, moved away from where they would ordinarily develop and live and be happy and landed, and why should it be expected that they should become landed here? You see, no region is getting more land, all right? So it shouldn't be that Buganda's accommodation of others should be taken as an elastic arrangement that cannot and will not lead to unnecessary social conflict. We mustn't have those kinds of solutions or those kinds of arguments. They're very dangerous, very, very dangerous. I remember being in a radio discussion or debate about land. It's a perennial subject, with a prominent politician from northern Uganda whose blushes I'll spare because he's not here, although I know he can spar very nicely. And he was talking about, oh, we will not have investors, we're going to spear them in Acholi, we will not agree with... When we went for a break, and you know that during the breaks there's a lot of frank discussion, I said to him, but when you say things like that, do you ever pause for a minute and ask yourself, what Buganda feel like when all the so-called development and everybody is here, and how you encourage us to go into very negative and unnecessary debates? That's very, very dangerous. To say that the relocation of people must be accommodated by one group at the cost, you know, with others not having to bear that burden. To the contrary, this would be my solution to that. One, let's look at the drivers of rural-urban migration. Let's look at ways of developing, and I think it's in the government plan, but let's look at ways of developing regional centers. There's no reason why a person has to walk all the way from Mbale to Kampala to get a job as a pusher of a cart. There should be economic development that enables them to achieve their aspirations in Mbale, the same in Kabale, the same in Arua, the same in Gulu. There must be regional centers. You know, you could have a discussion around federalism. Maybe that's a topic for another.
It's another whole
another whole program. But the basic point I make, without it, you know, going into how would it be structured and overlaid, why can't we have development that enables people to develop themselves where they are? Why aren't we looking at commercializing agriculture on a basis that enables people to cultivate and run their lives in their home areas and not have to migrate to the urban centers? The people that we're talking about in the urban centers, the urban poor, are suffering relentlessly. But I'm afraid dispossessing the kingdom of Buganda is not going to resolve their problems any more than dispossessing white farmers in Zimbabwe. And those were people who came from outside. But you're dispossessing people of their land, purportedly to resolve a landless situation, which is being driven by other factors. Let's look at education, let's look at regionalized development, let's look at all these drivers of rural-urban migration and try to find constructive ways to reverse them. Raymond, nobody wants to live a landless life. Nobody thrives on being urban poor. There's a beautiful song by Levinson called Mbera. Mbera. It's not that they're bad people, they want to be, you know, sitting and working in a toilet. Why can't that guy have a good job that enables them to buy a small house? What's the partnership that enables him to be able to afford a small, decent house? It's a partnership between a landowner and maybe a constructor from China, or maybe the government of Uganda's own national housing. Why can't national housing sit down with the Kingdom of Buganda and talk about building housing units? Why can't local government sit down with the Kingdom of Buganda and talk about, let's find ways of transforming what are large sprawling urban slums into organized, affordable housing units? These are constructive discussions that we need to have. We must have them.
Thank you so much, David. We're going to take a very short break, but we'll get back and get into the final part of the discussion, which is Buganda and the state, the politics and the governance reforms that are required. Let's take a very short break now. Thank you so much for staying with us, and welcome to the final edition of On the Spot. And I really need now to ask, we're going into the political discussion. Land is also a very political matter. It's where you derive your identity. It's also where you derive economy. It's a factor of production, a primary factor of production. Yes. David, there's people who suggest that the loss of the government in power today in Buganda is the principal driver for this land reform. Is that to be believed? Is it accurate? Is there a war between Buganda, the kingdom and the people, and the current government, which is holding onto the state, which is bringing these reforms?
Raymond, if there was a war between Buganda and the state, you would know, because we're in Buganda. There isn't a war around us. That's the first thing. But seriously, the point that you make is a point that we've heard before. We don't think that it's fairly made, because although the kingdom might be political, with a small p, is not partisanly political, and it's not engaged in mobilization or demobilization on a partisanly political basis. We're involved in mobilizing for development. We're involved, which lifts all boats. The Kawaka of Buganda is the Kawaka of all the people in Buganda. That means it would be foolhardy of the kingdom to engage in partisan political arrangements, because people belong to different parties. People have different political beliefs. But there are certain things which we all have in common. And we need institutions that bring us together and mobilize us along those lines that bring us together in common. So when I sit together with my brothers who come from the Fumbe clan, we don't come from the same clan as, I'll just use one random example, from the same clan as Edward Sekandi. He belongs to another clan. I may not be in the same political party with him. I may not be in the same clan with him, but we have a unity of purpose when it comes to kingdom functions. He led by his clan leader and me led by my clan leader will all be taken to our king. We can all then do things that enable our people in a unified way, regardless of religion, regardless of political beliefs, regardless of wealth or lack thereof, ideological position, whatever. We can do things that enable people, all of us, to grow together. So when the Kingdom of Buganda has said in its tenet, as I said, its third tenet, that hard work and economic growth is a desired objective of the kingdom. It's not merely rhetoric. It's a very useful way in which the state could work together, and all of the actors could work together with the kingdom to do things that enable us to develop. If a particular commercial entity, a corporate entity, decides that in order to reach more people in the Kingdom of Buganda, it must work with to reach more people in Buganda, it must work with the kingdom. Say to sponsor a large, let's talk about it, run, for example. And the kingdom is saying, let's use that awareness and the money raised in that project to look at public health, improving access to public health, raising awareness around HIV, AIDS, or particular other diseases, sickle cell before that, or fistula. Let's improve a hospital. That's not a bad thing. So, one, it's not true that the Kingdom of Buganda was engaged in partisan politics. What is true is that the Kingdom of Buganda is engaged in mobilization for development. It's engaged in mobilization for the public good. It's a native institution that can reach parts that cannot be reached by many other institutions. But you might find that, again, the state works with churches for a similar end. It's not because the Church of Uganda is supporting one or another, or the Roman Catholic Church is supporting one or the other. It's because that's another form of aggregation. Wherever people aggregate, it's important that the state works with those people for the betterment of these people. We're working with the same group. There is no, these are just subsets of the same society. So I don't perceive that there is a war. But if it's perceived on one side, they should be quickly disabused of it. And we should work together to the common end.
Away from just the recently concluded election, 1993 reforms on land, before that Idi Amin reforms on land, before that British colonial reforms on land, in Buganda have made Buganda a political entity. It behaves like a political entity. Do we anticipate that even with this land reform, Buganda will behave as a political entity by cooperation or even non-cooperation?
Raymond, I'd correct that. Buganda does not behave as a political entity because of British colonial or 1993 or 1998 or 1985 land reforms. And we can come to the question of whether there were reforms, in fact, or whether there were impositions. The Buganda Kingdom is much, much older than the British coming here. The Buganda Kingdom has existed and will exist in some form for so long as there are people here who acknowledge the existence of a king, who belong to clans, who speak a certain language, who have a common creation myth or origin myth, who aspire to certain things. It's inherently, to my mind, racist, actually, to believe that all our history began with colonialists. No, the colonialists found us here. They forced us into this arrangement. The situation that we're trying, the constant, trying to find a better position in the constraints that we find in is not unique to Buganda. It's only acute in Buganda because Buganda is where the seat of this colonial state is. It exists in places which don't wish to be in the same district with others. It exists in particular parts that were cut across by international boundaries and communities rent asunder. It's a fundamental, a bigger question than the tail end of a discussion point. But the most important thing is we are where we are and how we are. We must find ways of working together for the common good of the people, because the people of Buganda are people of Uganda, the people of East Africa. They must have their children in schools. They need good roads. They need good hospitals. They're dying of COVID. They need, all these things that affect the population, affect Buganda, Toro, Nkore, Acholi, Alur, the same. And I don't know that the Alur want their children not to go to school. I don't know that they don't want shoes. I don't know that they don't want a hospital. In fact, ask everybody. And the list of needs just may be different priorities, but the list of needs will be the same or similar. So why do we constantly thrive on the division or the points of departure and not look underneath and determine that actually these things that we want are very same or very similar? And perhaps I want them expressed in Luganda, but you want them expressed in Lutoro, and it's not mutually unintelligible, but it's mutually unintelligible with Lango. But if we spoke through an interpreter or the common English language, we might find that actually even the Lango want the same thing. The Karimajong want the same thing. When was there a conference in which the Karimajong said, take all the development and put it in Buganda? We want none. They never said that. The colonial history made it that way. So we need to find a way in which our Karimajong brothers and sisters are going to get value out of this system. We need to find, with some feeling that they're running themselves and not at the mercy of somebody else. The same has to happen with our brothers and sisters in Busoga, the same. Each community is in some way political. If you say it's not, then look at the so-called national leaders. What are their constituencies? I remember talking to a national leader one time and I asked her how she was a national leader. She said, well, I'm an MP. I said, excellent. In what language did you conduct your campaigns? She said, oh, Lunyoro. I said, exactly. He said, oh, and there's certain parts where I had to speak Swahili because they are Luo. I said, okay. So what was national about that? Why weren't you campaigning in Lusamia or in Karimajong or in Itesot or in... Because national includes all these communities. But actually, apart from Buganda, I don't think there's any place where all the communities of the country live together. But we must find ways, as I say again, of working together, looking for the common good, demonizing each other, always looking for the ways in which we are different, always trying to spark off conflict in one way or another. Negative propaganda is not good. And I think
yes,
if you want a good, strong 21st century power in Africa, look to the native institutions, the way we aggregate on a native basis, find ways of modernizing and working with those native institutions, and you'll have very solid pan-African institutions. Constantly think that the only way you will build a 21st century nation is by removing or burning one entity to the ground, native entities to the ground, is not only genocidal, contrary to the Rome Statute, but it has failed. It can't work.
I want us to spend these last minutes discussing the mind of the State Minister of Lands, because it's really important.
But I'm not a psychologist.
He's the driver of this
I'm
reform.
not a psychologist.
I know you're not, but it's important. And I'm going to ask my producer to play for me that last slide of a quote. He gave an interview to the New Vision and the Daily Monitor, in which he said, we're now in the third generation. The first Chibanja landholder, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren are all suffering. It's like the Bible notion that the third and fourth generations will pay a price for the sins committed by the ancestors. That must end at least with our generation. Everybody should have a title. I'm one of those people who are saying there's no need to compensate the Mailo land owners. They got it free of charge. They have been earning from it. They've been going to the bank to get loans with it. The entire land mass of the Mailo is occupied by Bibanja landholders.
I don't think I should be the one.
Yes,
Sorry,
but you've been saying on this show that there should be reasoned debate. Yes. You've discussed the idea that there should be compensation in a way so that no one gets beat about in this reform. The principal driver and engineer of reform in the land tenure system and person who's spoken on the record to the Daily Monitor, this is what they're saying. No compensation, expropriation of land without compensation, and he sees it as a generational problem, a generational political problem that he must stop.
Maybe the best person to address that would be the Attorney General of Uganda, for two simple reasons. It's not just a matter of what a particular minister thinks. I'm sure ministers have many thoughts in their minds, but government policy only becomes such when it's passed by cabinet with advice from Attorney General, etc. And it becomes formally a white paper. So this might be a view of this gentleman, and you know what they say about opinions. Everybody's entitled to their own.
But he's a key stakeholder.
He can have it.
Yeah.
We have a constitution in this country, which is the supreme law. The constitution is very clear in Article 26. Nobody will be compulsorily deprived of their property without that compulsory deprivation being in the public interest, without compensation, and without access to court to determine issues of, one, whether it's in the public interest, and two, if it is in the public interest, whether the compensation is adequate compensation. So the view, the fantasy that this is perpetual serfdom, somehow the 1900 landlords have lived nearly 200 years and are continuing to oppress the same people for 200 years. Again, might be something that he'll be disabused of. My father was born on a Chibanja. My father went to Oxford and Harvard, sponsored by these people that he calls very evil, the Kingdom of Buganda, on merit, on account of his participation in exams that got him out of Wampeo Primary School. He went from Wampeo Primary School on a scholarship of the Kingdom to Namiryango College. He went from Namiryango to Makerere. They took him from Makerere to Hull, they took him from Hull to Oxford, they took him from Oxford to Harvard. Chibanja boy, he came back with some money and bought Mailo. So where is this generation no curse that is perpetual and never ending? Is there something to be said also about raising household incomes? Has all of the failure to raise household incomes across the country been the fault of a certain small class of people? Or have there been people whose responsibility it has been to raise household incomes who haven't? Who killed cooperatives? Why was, you know, the great-grandfather or the grandfather of somebody able to grow coffee and send their kids to school, and those kids in school then improve their life, get into better production, more informed production, and become paid citizens? Go and look across the whole country. So there is the ideological fantasy land, let me be brutal on that front, of people that would like to believe that. But there's also reality. If the Katikiro has been traversing Buganda telling people, please get back into coffee growing, Emwanyi Terimba, with the backing of the Uganda Coffee Development Authority, it's been in order that we find ways, even around the present land tenure situation that we have, of getting people to grow their coffee, to get themselves out of poverty, and be able to have, you know, to break the chain of poverty. So I don't subscribe for a minute to that opinion. I think that opinion would not stand up in any court of law. But it's not just a legal issue. I don't want to be a lawyer. I want to be a real person talking to real people out there today in your audience. The moment a particular asset class is targeted for democratization and spreading, be worried about whatever you have made. Because there's a guy who doesn't have shoes. You've got 3 pairs of shoes in your house. Why, Raymond? Let's take out that 1 pair or 2 pairs and leave you with 1 and let the other guy have 1 and somebody else have it. Why is your bank account beyond 1 million shillings when you really can't spend more than 1 million shillings in a day? We'll leave you with 500,000 and we'll redistribute the other 500. There'll never be investment in this country, meaningful investment in this country. The FID that we're looking for will not work if this World Bank that you're quoting and all these others here, that actually there's expropriation, because let's call it what it is, there's expropriation. Let's look very calmly, no name calling, no fantasizing. Let's look at what's on the ground. Let's talk about what needs to happen. Let's fix our courts. Let's remove corruption from our police. Let's reinstate our district land tribunals to speed up disputes. Let's find ways of enabling people to get leasehold titles, which is a recognized land tenure system. The same gentleman opposed Chapa Mungaro. But everybody else around him, and possibly himself, went and got their leasehold title. So they're saying to people, it's a little bit like this vaccination thing and COVID with the right-wing politicians in the US. They're getting their vaccinations, but encouraging people not to get vaccinated. Go out. It reduces your land tenure risk. Find ways of supporting that. Work with the kingdom to ensure that, you know, people have titles to their land. It's surveyed, it's registered. Get viable partners who are not looking for free things. There are investors out there who will buy land. The first amount of money that comes into the country, if it's the acquisition of land, that money is not suddenly thrown into the air and disappears. It goes into doing things which builds your economy, lifts up your economy. Let's find ways, because nobody keeps, as I said, their land empty just because they love it. But then there might be a reason why some land has to remain empty. You see, we're not the last generation as well. So, and unused or underutilized. So we need to quickly get over this kind of, we're not going to get reform if we're shouting at each other. We need to talk to each other. We're not going to get proper reform if it's very clear that we're biased. We need to be unbiased. And we need to think of this generation, the next, and work for the future. Not constantly throw stones at each other because of the past.
David, one final thing. The Katikiro when appearing before the Land Commission, made recommendations.
Yes.
And the principal recommendation that Buganda has always suggested to the Ugandan state is we must encourage federalism.
Yes.
From your own thinking as a kingdom now, confronting this debate where a lot of people who are landless are now being weaponized to take on Mailo land owners, do you now think the best system of government is federalism, so that you encourage development in different areas, that people do not have to come to the center to feel like they are growing and developing? And would you be willing, the same way you said, there are 3 shoes in the room, so we give 1 shoe out, would you be willing to split the 65% of GDP made in Buganda and give it to other regions, and in a way that is fair, in a way that the state can regulate?
And it's not even so much giving, because you see, it's generated by people from all over. So let's be square about it, that aside from having a situation where you spread out the development and enable different parts of the country to grow, there'll be parts of the country that will need to be enabled to grow. You must agree about that. And there must be grants that go from one part to another to enable those parts to come up to a certain level. So everybody's pulling themselves up, not everybody pulling themselves down to a minimum standard. We have nothing, therefore you must have nothing. All right, that's the first thing. So federalism, properly done, should eliminate that kind of thinking, that in order for Uganda to grow, it must grow on the ruins of Buganda. It's been detrimental, and those who know, need to know that when there's been no stability in Buganda, Uganda as a whole has suffered far more than when there's not been stability in other parts of the country. We need the whole country to be stable. But a person must not yearn for development by seeking to capture the colonial state center. They must be able to get development where they are and how they are with their own priorities. If we look at the federalism through the land tenure issue paradigm, the land tenure system cannot be exactly the same for the Karimojong pastoralist as it is for the Muchiga cultivator, with population density disparities of that nature. It can't be. There must be some planning and prioritization and tenure that enables foraging, which can't be done in Kabale, because Kabale is, first of all, is about sedentary cultivation, but it's also very densely populated. So we can't say there'll be a cattle ranging land tenure, and it must be the same in Karamoja and it must be the same in Kabale. Let there be that flexibility to determine certain issues such as land use, subject to non-discrimination. It must be used rationally, economic and ecological sustainability, etc. Subject to some set of rules that applies to everybody. There must be some devolution. Let me use a neutral word. Some devolution of that thinking and that planning. Federalism really does bring out a useful solution for things like that. I'm not saying it's a panacea, but it's a start. It's an important thing. And when we say we're looking for a federal arrangement, it's not to say to the exclusion of others and we'll give them. No. Uganda has been built in a unitary arrangement. It's not been the most successful. It's not been the most peaceful over the history of Uganda. It's not been, if we look at its successes and failures, we may find ourselves ticking more failures than successes. But we mustn't also take away the successes. So you can't say suddenly Mulago will no longer be the National Referral Hospital. Makerere is ours because it's in our. It has to have common sense and logic to it, and it must be progressive. It can't always be rooted in the past. The past is important, but it must also be looking at the future, because we must also be looking at wider federations. We've got the East African Federation. There's no reason why the constitutive units of the Uganda Federation cannot also reach out into the East African Federation and come up with some arrangement that federates across the colonial state borders. So it can't be, oh, you can't federate here, but then we're supposed to federate across colonial borders. The arguments for, I think, cut across. So if you talk about true Pan-Africanism, again, you need to look at the way Africans, native, organize themselves. Modify that and use those blocks. The example that I constantly give is trying to build an igloo, because you've seen beautiful igloo structures in the northern hemisphere in the winter, and you want to build it here in the equator. It won't work. You need big refrigeration machines. You need constant building of ice blocks, and they're melting in the sun. But you've got your mud and wattle. If you're looking for structures that can hold many of you, get into the mud, start kneading it with your feet, and make a mud and wattle structure.
David, my final question to you, in bona fide goodwill, you have Sam Mayanja's number, just as you have routes and channels to engage government.
Yes.
Is it something you've considered picking up the phone at a personal level first to say, these your views are problematic? They could potentially, your individual pursuit of reform could potentially land the country in problems. Is it something that you've done at an individual level, but is it something you'll consider doing? And at an institutional level, are you going to engage those channels with the state to stop this land reform that could very likely, in your own words, be disastrous?
I wouldn't want to get into whether I've spoken to Sam Mayanja, whether I speak to him, whether I text him. Maybe he's texting me now, or maybe we'll text in the evening. It's not. I don't think it should be reduced to that kind of personal level. I think it's important, as I said, that everybody knows that there isn't, at least so far as I know, a government policy on this. Government policy is made in a certain way. Ministers have views on many things. The Minister of Water must have views on water and the environment, some which become government policy, many which probably don't. The Minister for Internal Affairs will have so many ideas and views on what to do, how to do it, but they don't become policy until they've been debated in cabinet, until they've been presented as government policy, in the form of a bill or some kind of regulation. So I don't think that it is necessary for us to get personal. I'm sure to the extent that we're informing a debate, and if it's done in good faith, our information will be taken in good faith. I know that institutionally, there are very many channels of discussion, open and ongoing discussion between the Kingdom of Buganda and the central government in many aspects, in public health, in agriculture, in local government. There's so many levels at which we're working together. We wouldn't be sitting here happily if we don't work together happily. Those workings together are for the benefit of all the people for whom we all serve. And I'm sure it's the same for the state with the churches. It's the same for the state with the banks. It's the same for there's so many stakeholders that have to say something about this. It's not just the Kingdom of Buganda. As I said, it's the churches, it's institutional landholders, other institutional landowners, it's other individual landowners who bought land, it's investors who bought land. Me calling Honorable Mayanja might resolve a difference of opinion between him and me. But that's not the problem. The problem is we have a land tenure situation that requires, as I was saying, calm, level-headed, even-handed resolution. Everybody who is concerned must be invited. They must talk about it. Nobody must be demonized. Nobody must be deified and made beyond reproach and or approach. And we'll find a solution. We spent a lot of money on the Bamugumere report. We'd like to read it. Let it be popularized. Let it be released, and let's see what she said. What did they find as a commission? What were the shortcomings? That can help institutional introspection. But we don't have that. So I'd rather not get into whether he thinks this or thinks the other or doesn't. Or I'd like to advise him to, now that he's in public office, to revise that part of public and administrative law that talks about, you know, how public officers must conduct themselves in order their decisions may not be impugned.
Yes.
But with that, and also to remember that, you know, we occupy these offices and we come out of them. How we behave in them is, you know, in my book I've written about it. Yeah. Let it be something that gives you joy and pride, and that will give your children pride in your name, rather than when they say that's so and so, oh my God. that used to be the minister. Hey, please don't talk about this. This is a polite akwanjula. Yes. You know, they say, well, but should you be marrying? That is, you know, we shouldn't do things that cause us to regret. Let's conduct ourselves when we're in office, knowing that we will leave that office. Those offices are passing things. They're transient. They're transient.
We've been speaking to David F.K. Mpanga, who is the Minister for Special Duties in the Buganda Kingdom, formerly Attorney General also. Thank you so much for our viewers who've tuned in to watch the program. We apologize. Patrick Kamara was unable to host this program, but he will be back really soon to host the programs. He's currently under the weather, as we'd say. Have yourselves a good evening and good night.